Hi, good to be talking to you again. This is my whiteboard series. It's a review of the Tier 1 cycle and then looking at a little bit of the management tools that are included in the whiteboarding toolbox. First, let's take a look at the Tier 1 cycle. It involves 3 different toolboxes. We have our I-Do interactive modeling, which is based off of a lot of whole brain teaching techniques. A beautiful, beautiful program for knowledge building. Then we have our We-Do component, the 3-higher whiteboarding, which is great for visibility to see what kids are thinking, give them feedback, have them revise it. So that's great for that. And then our third component is our Kagan cooperative learning, which is great for social skills, for kids learning from each other. I want to talk briefly about these 3 different toolkits because a lot of schools will be Kagan schools, or they will be whole brain teaching schools, or God forbid one day there's a whiteboarding school, which I hope never happens, for a very important reason. These toolboxes are wonderful, but all 3 are flawed. And I think that's important. In education, we have this silver bullet, this new thing we're going to do, Jeff's micro-level learning experience with whiteboards, it's going to transform things. No, it's not. There's nothing in education that is perfect. They all have their advantages and disadvantages. And I think really the key is trying to find that perfect combination. So we can take our first toolbox, whole brain teaching. It's beautiful for knowledge building. Getting the whole brain involved, and you can remember things for a very long time. And you have your visual cortex, your motor cortex, your auditory, all these together, you're able to build on knowledge. Now, that also works for remembering other people's critical thinking. If you're going to do some critical thinking yourself, you have to know what good critical thinking looks like. And whole brain teaching allows us to remember that. But here's the thing. The visibility of whole brain teaching is close to 0. And yes, you can walk around the room, but you're only going to hear parts of conversations and not from every student. So the visibility isn't that great. And whole brain teaching, a lot of it is mimicking the teacher, which is beautiful. That's wonderful. You need to be able to do that, but you're missing those vital pieces if it's just whole brain teaching. So then we have our next toolbox, 3-higher whiteboarding. It's great for visibility. Right? You can see what all students are thinking. It gives you great feedback. But at the same time, it's not that engaging. Yes, students they've at first, hey, writing things on the whiteboard, showing my teacher, getting immediate feedback is wonderful. But that wears away after a while. Right? You can't do whiteboarding all period long and, hey, this is the most engaging thing ever. No, kids will get tired of that. You have to mix things up. But it's good for what it does. It increases visibility, which is exactly what the research shows is going to increase student achievement. Another thing whiteboarding is not that great at is knowledge building. And that's part of that 3-higher, right? Whiteboarding is about high information. If you want to build knowledge, go to your whole brain teaching toolkit. Get kids moving and talking and visualizing and seeing things, right? But whiteboarding is not good for that. I mean, you can't, hey, we're going to learn this knowledge. Copy this down on your whiteboard. It's a waste of time. Interactive modeling is much better for that, right? And then finally, our Kagan cooperative learning. And there are Kagan schools out there all over the place. And Kagan methods are their main method of changing the micro-level learning experience, which is a wonderful thing. Those schools tend to be very, very successful. Also, there's some new whole brain teaching pilot schools out there. Those schools are going to be very successful, I have no doubt. But they're not as successful as they could be when you put these 3 models together. Because when you look at Kagan cooperative learning, it's beautiful for getting kids to give peer feedback. Right? But the teacher is removed. The teacher is more the facilitator. And so the visibility tends to be very low. Kagan cooperative learning has very low visibility, just like whole brain teaching has low visibility. Now, cooperative learning has high engagement. Not quite as high as whole brain teaching, but it's a mid-level engagement. So if we look at all 3 toolkits for visibility, whiteboarding is the highest visibility, Kagan cooperative learning is mid-level visibility, and whole brain teaching has very low visibility. But if you look at engagement, whole brain teaching is the highest engagement, Kagan is mid-level engagement, and whiteboarding is pretty low engagement. In fact, before I found these other 2 toolkits, I had to be the engaging person myself. What we were learning, my expression, the jokes I brought in, that made my lesson engaging, and the whiteboarding allowed me to see what kids were thinking. But now that I have whole brain teaching and Kagan cooperative learning under my belt, that becomes my engaging pieces. Once kids are engaged in the lesson, they think on their whiteboards, and we learn that way. Put all three toolboxes together. You've got a highly engaging program, highly visible, kids get lots of feedback, and they revise. They cooperate with each other, using all parts of their brain to think and remember. I mean, it's this beautiful I do, we do, to do progression. So I just wanted to briefly talk about the management tools that are included with the Rookie Toolkit. They're really simple, there's not really too much to them, but they're really important to solid whiteboarding and really understanding 3Hire and the process. So the first two tools that are related to each other are open boarding and close boarding. So in open boarding, students have their whiteboard and they set it on the table, and that's where it stays. And then students write while it's here. Now, it has to stay on the table. If you want students to hold it up as they go, you make sure you give them that direction, but it cannot be tipped back next to them. You want it open, it's completely like this, so it's visible to students and the teacher. And the reason for open boarding is really early on in the learning, you want students to be able to have some peer support, even when they're answering for their first response. It would be great and wonderful if you could always do closed boarding where they can't see each other's boards right away, but you don't want students to feel frustrated. You want them to feel successful. And looking at another student's board is just another way of getting peer feedback. Now, you don't want to depend on that too much though, because if they're always getting peer feedback, they never learn to think for themselves. And so transitioning to closed boarding a little bit later in the lesson is really, really important. Closed boarding, students take their board and they tip it up like this and they write like this. And usually what we'll say is only the teacher should be able to see it as you walk around and look. Now, is it going to be perfect? Are students going to be looking at each other's boards? Probably. But if you make it really clear that closed boarding is not a time for that, then that becomes a misbehavior. So you look for kids looking at other students' boards and go, this is closed boarding, please. Right? So you just set up that expectation, and students should be able to transition quickly from open boarding to closed boarding. And it really works well if you explain the reason behind it, right? With closed boarding, I want to see what only your brain knows so I can help you. Because that's the goal of whiteboarding, so I can see where your thinking is so I can help you learn. Now the great thing about this is you let the students know, okay, even though you're trying on your own, right, and you don't have your peers to depend on, well, you're going to respond, but afterwards you're going to get feedback and you're going to be able to change your response. So maybe students after closed boarding will hold their boards up, right, for a whiteboard look. And so they get the feedback, now they're able to fix their response. But the idea is they try it with their own brains first, then they get that response. Open boarding, set down on the table, cannot tip it back, don't play that game, don't let them, angle their boards or anything like that. Don't let them go sit elsewhere and put their boards wherever they want, because they'll waste your ink and they'll write things that have nothing to do with learning on their whiteboards. And then closed boarding, tipped up against them, they're writing on their own, using their own mind. So it's actually a really good time then to remind you of our whiteboard cycle, in that you start with an interactive element, right? So you have an element, which is anything kids are going to think about. So it could be a picture, it could be a couple sentences that you say, it could be a memory from interactive modeling, something they're going to interact with, that's the element, and then an interaction, a specific way to think about that element, and they write it on their board. So when they write it on their board, that's called the response. And the response should mostly be closed boarding, because you want all kids to think for themselves visibly. And you can walk around and see what they're writing as a teacher, but they can't copy off their peers, or you want to try to prevent that. So then once that's done, you could go to open boarding. Okay, put your whiteboards out, let's take a look at them. You could do a whiteboard pass, where you pass your whiteboard to someone else, you look at what they did, then you get yours back and you revise it. But that's that immediate feedback and revision, which comes after the response. And open boarding and closed boarding help a lot with that. So another management tool which helps out a lot are ready positions and away positions. For ready positions, students have a whiteboard marker inside a sock. This is actually the best tool to use to erase boards, simply because the marker can be stored inside the sock. But another great reason for it is that these can last forever. Because it's a sock. You just throw it in the washer with all your other socks, you put it through one cycle, and it's perfectly clean and fresh, and you don't have to go through whiteboard erasers or anything like that. Yep. In terms of markers, Expo markers tend to be the best. Anything cheaper than that, they dry out so quickly or the tips break off. Expo just seems to work better than the rest. I'm definitely not a shill for Expo, but these markers tend to work well. And I've done a lot of research into the cheapest price for Expo markers, and it's usually going to be Amazon bulk. And you can buy, if you spend about $100, which I know is a lot, but $100 should be able to last you throughout the rest of the year if you're buying bulk on Amazon. So just a little bit of whiteboard knowledge. Also the boards, go to Home Depot or Lowe's. They have gigantic fiberboard sections, huge boards, and they'll cut those into squares for you if you tell them you're a teacher and you ask very nicely. They'll cut some whiteboard squares for you. So 40 of these boards will only cost about $15. It's actually the cheapest way to do it is to get them cut at Home Depot or Lowe's. Ready positions. In ready positions, students have their board so that it's open, right, so that they can write on it, and they put their name in the upper left-hand corner, just like that. Now, why have their name in the upper corner? Well, this is key. First of all, at the beginning of the year, you can learn your students' names very easily if every time you look at their board, their name's next to it, very visible names as well. Or if you're going to take whiteboard pictures and you take a picture of the board, their name's right here so you know that their response belongs to them. This also helps if you're going to be passing boards around the room and you want them to go back to the original student when you're done getting that feedback with, let's say, a whiteboard pass. Having their name will allow that board to go back to the correct person. A lot of students will ask, should I keep my name on it? Should I erase it too? If they keep their name on the board, that's wonderful. But of course, it's actually going to get erased and they'll just need to write it in there. So if you say ready positions, as quickly as possible, they grab out their marker, their sock, they write their name on the board. Now the Ready Positions tool also tells them exactly where to put the sock and the marker. So the sock is going to be on the side ready to go to erase, and the marker is going to be on the top of their board like this on their table. Very important, because if the marker is far away from them when you're not using it, then you can very easily see if kids are reaching up across their board to grab their marker, right? It also separates the sock and the marker, because if the marker's inside the sock, you never know, students could twirl this over their head, or if your class is crazy enough, throw it across the room. So that being said, I'm a science teacher at heart, and in science, we put supplies on the tables all the time. And you learn very early on in your career as a science teacher how to manage supplies. And the key to managing supplies and having whiteboards out is to be extremely anal on the tiny little details. So yes, your marker must be exactly 1 inch away from the board on the top of the board. No, it cannot be tilted. It needs to be straight with the board. Your sock must be straight out like this, exactly next to the board, 1 inch away. And here's the thing, that is ridiculous, right? And the reason for it is if you take care of all those tiny little details and kids think you're a stickler for the little details, the big details aren't even in question, right? Students aren't going to throw markers across the room if they're more worried about, oh, this got to be 1 inch apart, right? You're giving them lots of positive expectations, things to follow, directions to follow. They don't even have time to think about the big things they could possibly do. So that's one of the keys. The key to also having supplies in your room and using things like whiteboards is to have a definite system and a plan. Ready positions, away positions, they tell you exactly where the board goes, and that's really important. You don't want to just have kids have boards and do what they want with them. But a lot of teachers will not set up those behavioral expectations, and they'll give up on whiteboarding because of the misbehavior in the classroom. Misbehavior can easily be taken care of with a really, really good plan. That being said, will there be some students that bend the rules and twirl socks when they shouldn't be twirling socks? Sure. So then the question I have for you is, what's your response to that? Right? I have multiple responses I could give to that. I could point to my norms, my expectations. I could point to the procedures. But the idea is you need to have a pre-planned response for when kids are using boards the way they shouldn't be using them. So that's ready position. Name on the board, set on the table, sock on the side, marker on top. Away positions are simply the opposite of that. Away positions, the board is clean, so they erase it with their sock. The board is completely turned over. The marker is inside the sock. and the sock is on top of the board away from them for the exact same reason as it was when the marker was on top, so that if it's far away, it's easier for you to see when kids reach over to grab the marker and sock. And the best way to make this happen is to rehearse early and often, right? So, okay, we're gonna do away positions, now ready positions, now away positions, open boarding, close boarding, rehearse, 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 rehearse. Don't wait until you're using the boards in order to teach kids these management tools. Rehearse them ahead of time so kids know what they are, they know the expectations. It's gonna make your whiteboarding a lot more smooth. So a couple other management tips just as add-ons. I think the key that I've always found is if you're going to use whiteboards, have them on the tables when kids come in the room the first day. Have the markers on the tables when kids come in the room the first day. And have an organizational system. Now, I had pencil boxes on their tables, and each pencil box had the markers and socks inside of it. And in my mind, it was out of sight, out of mind for now. And then students at the beginning of class get the markers out. At the end of class, they put the markers back in. Right? If we know we're not going to be using markers for a while, then we'll just put the markers back into the pencil box. It's to the side, it's out of the way. And so that's important. The boards, same thing, they could be on the pile on the side of the table until you actually need them, and so students then get them out. Now keep in mind, this is all, I'm assuming tables, right? Tables are actually a lot easier to store supplies. Now, for a lot of you, I know you have student desks, and where you're going to store these supplies becomes a bit of a logistical nightmare. There are some definite solutions that I've seen people use. My favorite one is if students are in groups, to have one student in charge of the boards and the markers, and you time how quickly it takes for that one student in charge of like a team of 4 to get those out to those students, right? And then you time how long it takes for them to get them back from those students. So basically you create student leaders that can distribute and take back the supplies. But notice you want it to be as timely as possible because you don't want to waste any time. And then also keeping the boards out on the desks. It's a nice surface for kids to do work on, right? There's no reason to have to put it away if you know you're going to be using it frequently throughout class. One other option for where to keep them is if you're an elementary school teacher, I know they sell those cubby keepers that are on the back of the chairs. Those are wonderful. One thing you can definitely do, and it's actually in the advanced toolbox, is you can use Velcro whiteboards, where they have those little circular Velcro things, that stickers that stick on, and you can Velcro them to some sort of surface. It could be the back of the chair if that's possible, or underneath your desk, Velcro it up to the top like that. Velcro can give you those extra storage options as well. The idea is you want to be able to get kids to have the boards as a regular part of class, just an extremely regular thing that happens every day, and so it's not seen as out of the ordinary. Let's say you're worried about these supplies, so you put them in this isolated corner and you only get them out every once in a while and they just collect dust, right? Well, you're guaranteeing yourself a nightmare when those supplies finally get on the tables. They're new, they're novel, they're something to play with for kids. Versus if they're out there all the time, then they're old news. Oh yeah, the supplies are there, we do that every day, that's not that big of a deal. It's funny, you would think I keep those supplies out there for time management, but I actually don't. I keep the supplies out there so that they are second nature to the kids. If it's not novel and new, they're not going to mess around with it as much, right? The whiteboards are just always there. That's the way Mr. Mac does things, and that's management with whiteboards. All right, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them. Send me a message if you would like my toolbox to take a look at. Let me know and I will email it to you. I'll send it to you through Interact. All right, have an excellent week. Good luck teaching your kids, and I'll talk to you soon.